I still remember the smell of that field-wet earth and charred rye, the kind that sticks to your boots and one tea shake off no matter how hard you scrub. It was late April, though I didn't know the date then. Time had gone soft around the edges, like old bread left too long in the pantry. We'd been walking for days, a ragged line of girls mostly, though some were older, with faces so tired they looked carved from stone. We wore what was left of our uniforms, patched and stained, our hair tucked up under caps that once meant something, once carried a kind of order. But by then, the order had unraveled. The war wasn't over, not quite, but the way things crumbled around us, you could feel it in your bones, like the air before a storm that never quite breaks. We weren't soldiers, not really. Most of us had been clerks, telephone operators, nurses in field hospitals that kept getting pushed farther and farther east. Still, the Americans called us prisoners. I suppose we were. They came upon us near a bend in the road where the trees thinned out and the sky opened up too wide. I remember thinking how strange it was that blue so clear after weeks of smoke and low cloud. And then I saw them, American soldiers, moving with a kind of calm I hadn't seen in anyone for years, not shouting, not swinging rifles like the ones we'd grown used to, just walking, steady boots crunching the gravel. At first, I couldn't tell their faces from that distance. It wasn't until they stopped about 20 meters off, and one of them stepped forward, raising a hand not in threat, just to signal us to halt, that I noticed his skin was dark. I froze. Not because I was afraid of him. Not exactly. It was more like my body remembered something before my mind could catch up. A whisper from schoolbooks, newsreels, the things adults said in low voices when they thought children weren't listening. Black men were beasts, they said. Animals. Dangerous. Uncontrolled. I was 12 the first time I heard that, and by 17 it had settled into me like marrow. You don't question what your bones believe, and yet there he stood, tall, calm, waiting. There were maybe 6 of them, all black, all moving with the same quiet efficiency. One knelt to check a map, another passed around canteens. No one spoke loudly. No one looked at us with that hungry glare we'd been warned about. In fact, they hardly looked at us at all. Not the way you'd expect men to look at a group of women, alone, on a road. It was worse, in a way being ignored like that. It made you feel invisible, and invisible is a kind of death when you spend weeks wondering if anyone even knows you're still alive. The officer, though he wore no insignia I recognized, finally nodded to a younger one, who walked over slowly, hands loose at his sides. He couldn't have been older than 20. With eyes that held you without holding you down, he asked, in careful German, if any of us were hurt. His accent was thick, but his words were clear. I remember staring at his lips, at the way his voice didn't rise or waver. I couldn't answer. My throat had closed up like a fist. It was Liesel who spoke, standing just behind me, her voice thin but steady. 9. We're not hurt. He nodded, as if that was all he needed to know, and turned back to the others. They didn't search us, didn't take our things, though we had little lefts, just a few photographs wrapped in oilcloth, a pocket knife, a rosary someone's mother had pressed into her daughter's hand the last time they hugged. They didn't even take our boots, though one of the girls' heel had sores on her heels that bled through her socks. Instead, they gave us water. One of the soldiers, taller, with a scar along his jaw, handed me a canteen and said, in English, "Drink slow." I did. The water was warm and tasted faintly of metal, but I've never known anything so kind. They walked us to a makeshift holding area near a farm that had anti-burned all the way down, just the barn's roof gone, the rest still standing like it was holding its breath. There were other prisoners already, their men in tattered Wehrmacht uniforms, a few civilians, an old woman clutching a suitcase. But the Americans didn't hurt us like cattle. They marked a perimeter with rope and told us to stay inside it. No guards stood watch with rifles cocked. They just stayed nearby, talking among themselves, sharing cigarettes, mending a torn pack with needle and thread. One of them whistled a tune. I almost recognized something soft and looping, like a lullaby you'd hum without meaning to. That night, it rained. Not hard, just a steady drizzle that made the ground slick and turned the field into mud. We huddled under a tarp someone had rigged between 2 fence posts. Liesel pressed close to me, shivering, though it wasn't cold. "They're not what we were told," she whispered, and I didn't answer, because I didn't know how to say that the worst part wasn't that they were was that I'd believed the lies so completely, I hadn't even questioned them, until that moment. I'd carried that fear like a stone in my chest for years, and now, faced with its emptiness, I felt hollowed out. In the days that followed, the same soldiers came and went. They brought food, hardtack, tinned meat, sometimes bread they must have taken from their own rations. They never spoke much, but they watched us, not with suspicion, but with something like care. Once, I saw the young one, the one whom D first spoken to Usand, a bar of soap to an old prisoner, a man with a limp and eyes that stared past everything. The man didn't say thank you, he just took it and bowed his head, and the soldier nodded like that was enough. I began to notice things, how they treated each other, how they shared without being asked, how they laughed quietly, like laughter was something precious to be rationed. And I thought of the things I'd heard back home about, how these men couldn't be trusted, how they lacked discipline, how they were lesser, dangerous. The word Untermensch echoed in my head like a curse. I'd never realized I'd spoken myself. Not out loud, no, but in the way I'd crossed the street when I saw a foreign worker, in the way D never questioned why certain jobs were only for certain people, in the way D looked away when someone said something cruel and called it patriotism. I don't know why I remember the soap so clearly. It was just a small thing, wrapped in plain paper, already half-used, but it felt like a mirror held up to everything I'd been taught, and in its dull, ordinary surface, I saw how easily I'd accepted a world built on lies. They processed us slowly, asking questions we answered in hushed voices. Names, ranks, if you could call what we had ranks, last known postings. They wrote it all down in ledgers, their hands steady, their faces unreadable. I kept waiting for the moment when they'd turn cruel, when the mask would slip and the monster we'd been warned about would show itself. But it never came. And that absence began to frighten me more than any violence could have, because if this was who they really were, if the kindness was real, if the restraint was real, then what did that say about us, about me? One afternoon, the tall one with the scar sat on a crate near the edge of our enclosure, cleaning his rifle with slow, deliberate motions. I was sitting a few meters away, mending a tear in my coat with a needle so fine it barely caught the light. Our eyes met for just a second, and he didn't look away quickly, the way men often did when caught staring. He just looked, not with hunger or judgment, but with a kind of quiet recognition, as if he saw something in me I hadn't let myself see yet. And in that glance, I felt the first real crack in the wall I'd built around myself, not because he said anything, but because he didn't need to. I've thought about that look for decades since. Not because it changed everything in an instant, that kind of thing only happens in books, but because it was the first time someone saw me, without the uniform, without the lies, without the fear. And maybe that's what frightens us most of all, not cruelty, but being seen. The days blurred after that. More prisoners came. Some of our group were taken away to other camps. Liesel was sent east with a convoy of nurses. I never saw her again. But those soldiers, the ones who first found us, they stayed for a while longer. Long enough that their faces became familiar, their voices part of the rhythm of that strange, suspended time. I don't know their names. I never asked. Maybe I was afraid to, or maybe I knew, even then, that names make things real, and I wasn't ready for that kind of truth. But I remember the way the young one whistled that tune in the rain, over and over, like a thread he was following back to something he'd lost. And I remember how, one evening, as the light faded and the field turned gold at the edges, he looked up from his boots and said, almost to himself, "Ain't no different, are we?" He wasn't speaking to me. I don't think he even knew I heard. But those words settled into me like roots, and I've carried them ever since, not as comfort, but as a question I'm still learning how to live with. There were other moments, smaller ones. A shared cigarette passed in silence, a blanket offered without a word, a glance held a second too long. None of it was grand. None of it would make a story worth telling if you were looking for heroes or villains, but it was real. And that's the thing I've come to understand. All these years later, reality doesn't announce itself with trumpets. It slips in through the cracks, when you're not looking, when you're too tired to pretend anymore. I used to think courage was something loud, a charge, a shout, a flag raised high, but now, I know it can be as quiet as a man handing you water when he has little to spare, as unremarkable as choosing not to harm someone who's already broken. And maybe that's why I've never spoken of it, not really, not until now. Because how do you explain that the moment your world shifted wasn't on a battlefield, but in a muddy field, in the space between one breath and the next, when a stranger looked at you and saw you, not your uniform, not your country, not your sins, but just you? I still don't know how to hold that, but I'm trying. Weeks passed, Or maybe it was only days. I'd lost count by then, but the Americans began rotating units through, and eventually those men were gone, replaced by others, white, this time, louder, less patient. They barked orders we barely understood, counted us like sacks of flour, and when one of the girls coughed too long in line, they didn't ask if she needed a medic. They just moved her to the back and kept counting. It wasn't cruelty, not exactly just indifference, the kind that wears you down faster than anger ever could. And yet, I found myself watching the road more than I should have. As if expecting to see those familiar silhouettes again, the way you look for a face in a crowd, even when you know it won't be there. I didn't speak of them to the others. It felt too private, too fragile, like naming them might make the memory dissolve. Besides, what would I say? That I'd been seen by men my whole country had taught me to fear, and that their restraint had unsettled me more than any violence. That in their quiet decency, I'd glimpsed the architecture of my own complicity. No, those were thoughts you kept folded small and tucked away, like the photograph of my brother I kept in my shoe, his smile already fading from the paper. We were moved again, this time to a proper camp near the Rhine, where the fences were real, and the guards watched with eyes that didn't blink. The food was worse, the nights colder, but it was orderly, which in those days felt like a kind of mercy. Still, I couldn't settle. Something had shifted inside me, not all at once, but like a slow leak you don't notice until the vessel is nearly empty. I'd lie awake listening to the others breathe, thinking of how easily we'd accepted the stories we were fed, how we'd worn our ignorance like a shield. We'd been told we were protecting something pure, something worth dying for. But standing in that field, watching a man with hands rough from labor offer water to a stranger who'd been raised to hate him, I saw the truth. We hadn't been protecting anything. We'd been hiding. One morning, a new transport arrived, civilians, this time, women and children from a village the Allies had shelled. Among them was a girl, no older than 10, clutching a scorched doll by its arm. She sat alone near the fence, her knees drawn tight to her chest, and no one went to her, not out of malice, but exhaustion. We were all too tired to tend to another's grief. But I remembered the soap, the canteen, the way the tall one had simply handed it over without fanfare or expectation. And so, before I could think better of it, I walked over, crouched beside her, and offered half of my morning bread. She didn't look up at first, just stared at the ground as if it might swallow her. But after a long moment, she took it. Didn't say thank you, just held it in both hands like it was something sacred. I stayed there a while, not speaking, just being present in the way I'd seen those soldiers be present, without demand, without performance. It wasn't redemption. I know that now. You don't wash away years of silence with a single act of kindness, but it was a small, almost invisible refusal to let the world stay as it was. And in that refusal, I felt something I hadn't in years, not hope, not exactly, but the absence of numbness. After the war ended officially though, it took weeks for the news to feel real. We were released in waves, sent back to whatever scraps of home remained. I walked for days, hitched rides on carts, slept in barns where the hay still smelled of smoke. When I finally reached my village, it was smaller than I remembered. The buildings hunched like old men avoiding eye contact. My parents were gone, killed in a bombing I'd only heard about weeks later, but my aunt took me in without asking questions. As if she knew some silences were better left unbroken. Life resumed, in its halting, awkward way. I found work in a bakery, kneading dough before dawn. The rhythm of it almost meditative. Men came back from the front, hollow-eyed and quick to anger, and women pretended not to notice the gaps in their stories. We all learned to speak around the things we couldn't face, but sometimes, in the quiet hours before sunrise, when the oven was just beginning to hum and the street outside was still dark, I'd think of that field again, of the way the air had felt lighter after the rain, of how the young soldier's voice hadn't carried the weight of judgment, only exhaustion and something softer, something like sorrow. And I'd wonder if he ever thought of Usav, the women who stood there trembling, not from cold, but from the collapse of everything we thought we knew. Did he understand what his simple humanity had done? Probably not. And that was part of it, wasn't it? The truest kindnesses are the ones that don't announce themselves, that don't seek witness. Years later, when I was married, though not happily, though not unhappily either, just quietly, the way so many marriages were in those days, I found a newspaper clipping tucked in a second-hand book. It was a small piece, buried near the back, about a unit of black soldiers being honored in some American city. There was no photograph, no names, just a few lines about their service in Europe. I read it 3 times, then folded it carefully and put it in the drawer with my few keepsakes: the photo of my brother, a button from my father's coat, the stub of a pencil I'd used to write letters I never sent. I didn't show it to anyone. It wasn't mine to share. My husband never asked about the war. He'd been in Russia, came back with a limp and a silence that never lifted. We built a life around what we didn't say, which in its own way was a kind of peace. We had a daughter, fair-haired, serious, with eyes that missed nothing. When she was old enough to ask questions, I told her only what was necessary, that the world had been broken, and we'd tried to mend it. She never pressed for more. Maybe she sensed there were wounds too deep for words. Now, in the evenings, when the light slants low through the kitchen window, and the kettle begins to sing, I sometimes catch myself humming that tune, the one the young soldier whistled in the rain. I don't know the name of it, don't even know if I remember it right, but the shape of it lingers, like a shadow at the edge of a room. And in those moments, I don't think of nations or uniforms or the great, terrible machinery of war. I think of hands, how they can build or break, how they can offer or take, how sometimes just once in a lifetime, they can hold out something ordinary and make it feel like grace. I never saw those soldiers again. I never learned their names. And maybe that's as it should be. Some truths aren't meant to be owned, only carried. So I carry it, quietly, carefully, like a stone that's grown warm from being held too long.